I'm Erica Jefferson, 38, and after 15 years of service, I'd just been promoted to major in the U.S. Army. For years, I was the one my family could count on: rides, money, help with emergencies, no questions asked. But when I asked for a simple ride after my promotion ceremony, my sister said, "We're at a barbecue, call a ride," and my dad added, "Should have arranged this earlier." That was the moment I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been brushed off by the very people you've always shown up for? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being overlooked, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, respect, and reclaiming your worth. What happened after that message might surprise you. I learned early that in my family, showing up wasn't optional, it was expected. When Mom needed someone to drive Cassie to dance practice every Tuesday for 3 years, I did it. When Dad's truck broke down and he needed a ride to work for 2 weeks straight, I rearranged my college schedule without question. When my younger brother Jake got arrested for underage drinking his sophomore year, I bailed him out at 2 in the morning and never mentioned it to our parents. That was just how we operated. I was the eldest, the responsible one, the safety net everyone could count on. Our house sat on a corner lot in a working-class neighborhood where practicality mattered more than sentiment. Dad fixed cars in the garage on weekends, Mom worked double shifts at the hospital, and achievements were acknowledged with a nod and maybe a "good job" before moving on to the next thing that needed handling. "Erica's got her head on straight," Dad would tell people. "She'll figure it out." And I always did. When Cassie needed money for a school trip, I covered it. When Jake crashed his car junior year, I helped negotiate with the insurance company. When Mom needed someone to handle Grandma's estate paperwork after she passed, I spent 3 weekends sorting through decades of documents and coordinating with lawyers. The pattern felt natural then. Family meant being there, stepping up, making things work. I didn't think about what I was getting back because that wasn't how I measured relationships. You showed up because that's what family did. College came and went with me, commuting from home, saving money, helping maintain the household rhythm. I studied business administration because it was practical, but something about the structure and purpose of military life kept pulling at me. Maybe it was the clarity of it: clear expectations, clear rewards, clear consequences. During my senior year, I started talking to recruiters. "Military?" Mom said when I told them about my plans. "That's a big change." Dad looked up from his newspaper. "Good benefits, steady pay. Could do worse." Cassie was 17 then, wrapped up in senior year drama and college applications. "Just don't expect me to write you letters or anything," she said, not looking up from her phone. The lack of fanfare felt normal. Our family didn't do big emotional scenes or lengthy celebrations. We were practical people who kept moving forward, who handled what needed handling without making a production out of it. Basic training was 8 weeks of the hardest physical and mental challenges I'd ever faced, but something about the structure felt right. Every day had clear objectives. Performance was measured and acknowledged. When you excelled, people noticed. When you helped a fellow soldier, it meant something concrete. I came home for a brief leave before my first assignment, and the house felt exactly the same. Dad was still tinkering with engines in the garage. Mom was still picking up extra shifts. Cassie was dealing with freshman year college adjustment drama, and Jake was figuring out whether to stay in community college or try transferring somewhere else. "How was boot camp?" Mom asked over dinner. "Challenging but good. I learned a lot." "That's nice, honey." The conversation moved to Jake's car troubles and whether Cassie would come home for Thanksgiving break. I realized I'd expected something different. Maybe more questions about my experience, curiosity about what came next, some recognition that this represented a major life change. Instead, it felt like I'd been away at a long work conference. But that was fine. That was us. We weren't sentimental people. My first assignment took me to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I worked in logistics coordination. The job required attention to detail, problem-solving skills, and the ability to work under pressure, all things that felt natural after years of being the family problem solver. My commanding officers noticed my work. I earned commendations. I got promoted ahead of schedule. When I called home with news about making sergeant ahead of my peers, Dad said, "That's great, Erica. Your work ethic always paid off." The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes before Mom needed to get to work and Dad had a car to finish. I hung up feeling proud but oddly hollow, like I'd shared important news with polite acquaintances rather than family. Over the next several years, the pattern continued. I'd come home on leave, spend time catching up, help with whatever crisis or project needed attention, then return to base life. The family group chat became our main connection, a steady stream of logistics coordination for holidays, birthdays, and family events. Can anyone pick up groceries for Sunday dinner? Jake needs a ride to the airport Tuesday. Mom's car is making that noise again. Can someone take a look? I contributed when I could from a distance, sent money when needed, adjusted my leave schedule to accommodate family events. It felt like a natural extension of the role I'd always played, just from further away. My military career progressed steadily. I earned my bachelor's degree through evening classes, got promoted to staff sergeant, then sergeant first class. I specialized in supply chain management and emergency logistics, skills that proved valuable during training exercises and real-world deployments. The work was demanding but satisfying. When Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, I spent 3 months coordinating relief supply distribution. When wildfires devastated parts of California, our unit provided logistical support for evacuation operations. These weren't just jobs, they were opportunities to make a concrete difference in crisis situations. But sharing these experiences with family felt increasingly difficult. The gap between my daily reality and theirs kept widening. They'd ask generic questions about how things were going, and I'd give generic answers because explaining the complexity of coordinating multi-state disaster relief or the satisfaction of earning recognition from senior command felt like speaking a foreign language. "Erica's doing well in the Army," Mom would tell relatives at family gatherings. "Very responsible, just like always." Which was true but incomplete. I wasn't just being responsible, I was excelling, growing, building expertise, earning respect from colleagues and superiors. But that nuance seemed to get lost in translation. The family dynamic remained exactly as it had always been, just stretched across geography. They still expected me to be available for advice, financial help, and emotional support. I still provided it because that's what family meant. The difference was that now I had a separate life where my contributions were recognized, valued, and rewarded with concrete advancement. That separation made the contrast more obvious, but I didn't think much about it at the time. Family was family. Work was work. Both mattered, but in different ways. Looking back, I can see that's when the foundation started shifting, even though none of us noticed it happening. The changes started small, the kind of shifts you don't recognize until you're standing in the middle of them wondering how you got there. The family group chat evolved from practical coordination to something more social, photos from barbecues I wasn't at, inside jokes from conversations I hadn't been part of, plans that seemed to form organically around everyone's schedule except mine. "Who wants to meet up for Dad's birthday dinner Saturday? Cassie and I can do 6 p.m. Works for everyone else? Perfect. See you guys there." I'd read these exchanges from my barracks or during training exercises, feeling like I was watching my family's life through a window. When I could participate, I did. When I couldn't, the plans proceeded without me, which made sense logically but felt isolating in ways I struggled to articulate. Cassie had graduated college and started working in marketing for a healthcare company. Her social circle expanded rapidly: work friends, college friends, new romantic interests. The family chat increasingly featured updates about her latest adventures, weekend trips, professional achievements that Mom and Dad celebrated with enthusiasm. "Cassie got promoted to senior marketing specialist. That's wonderful, honey. We're so proud. Dinner this weekend to celebrate?" When I earned my promotion to Master Sergeant after 8 years of service, I shared the news in the group chat with characteristic brevity. "Got promoted to Master Sergeant yesterday. Next step toward warrant officer track." "Congrats, Erica," came the responses. "Great job. Nice work." The conversation moved on to planning Cassie's celebration dinner within minutes. I told myself the difference didn't matter. Promotions were a part of my job. I didn't need external validation to feel proud of my accomplishments. But something about the disparity in enthusiasm was hard to ignore, especially when I watched my colleagues celebrate their family's genuine excitement about military milestones. My mom cried when I told her about making Master Sergeant, one of my fellow NCOs mentioned during a break between training sessions. She called everyone she knows. I smiled and congratulated him, but internally I was calculating whether my family would even remember which rank came after which if someone asked them. The pattern became more pronounced as Cassie's career accelerated and her social obligations multiplied. Family gatherings increasingly revolved around her schedule, her relationships, her latest professional developments. This wasn't malicious. She was simply more present, more available, more integrated into the daily rhythm of family life. "We should plan something for Memorial Day weekend," Mom suggested in the group chat. "I've got that wedding in Chicago," Cassie replied. "Can we do the weekend after?" "What about Erica's schedule?" Jake asked. "I'm flexible," I typed, which was true. Military leave required advanced planning, but I'd learned to build family time into my requests whenever possible. "Great, weekend after Memorial Day it is." But when the weekend after Memorial Day came, Cassie had a work conference that ran over. The family gathering got postponed again, then eventually forgotten as other events took priority. These individual incidents felt minor, barely worth mentioning. But collectively, they created a pattern where my availability was assumed while everyone else's needed to be accommodated. I began to feel like a backup plan rather than a priority, someone whose presence was nice to have but not essential for the family to function or celebrate. The revelation came during a conversation with my squad leader about work-life balance. "Family time is important," she said, "but it has to be mutual. You can't be the only one making the effort." I'd been complaining about missing another family event due to unexpected training requirements, feeling guilty about disappointing people. Her response made me think about reciprocity in ways I hadn't considered before. When was the last time someone in my family had adjusted their schedule to accommodate mine? When had they shown up for something important to me the way I'd consistently shown up for them? The questions felt uncomfortable because I couldn't immediately answer them. I started paying closer attention to the dynamics during my next leave home. Small things became more obvious. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room, inside references I didn't understand, assumptions about my availability that no one made about Cassie or Jake. "Erica can drive," Dad said when Jake needed a ride to pick up his car from the mechanic. "She's not doing anything else." The casual dismissal of my time stung more than it should have. I was on leave, relaxation time I'd earned through months of demanding work. But somehow that got translated as not doing anything else, as if my presence at home was inherently less valuable than whatever everyone else had going on. "Actually, I was planning to visit some friends from high school," I said. The room went quiet for a moment. Dad looked confused, like the idea of me having social plans independent of family needs hadn't occurred to him. "Well, can't you do that later?" he asked. I ended up driving Jake, of course. But the interaction planted a seed of awareness that grew over the following months. I began noticing how often I was expected to be flexible while flexibility was rarely extended in return. How my plans were treated as movable while everyone else's were fixed. How my achievements were acknowledged politely but briefly while Cassie's were celebrated extensively. The military had taught me to evaluate situations objectively, to look at patterns and data rather than getting caught up in emotions. When I applied that analytical approach to my family relationships, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. I was giving more than I was receiving, consistently and over time. Not just money or practical help, but attention, flexibility, and emotional energy. The relationship had become fundamentally one-sided, though I suspected no one else recognized it because the imbalance had developed so gradually. The question was what to do about it. I could bring it up directly, but that felt like asking people to care about me more, which seemed both futile and humiliating. I could continue the pattern, accepting that this was simply how our family worked, but the resentment was becoming harder to suppress. Or I could start making different choices about where to invest my time and energy, letting natural consequences teach the lessons I couldn't articulate directly. That third option felt the most honest, though I wasn't sure I had the courage to follow through with it. 12 years of military service teaches you to recognize when a situation is about to shift. There's a tension in the air, a sense that everything familiar is about to change in ways you can't predict or control. I felt that tension building through the spring as my promotion to major became increasingly likely. The promotion board had gone well. My commanding officer had submitted a strong recommendation. My performance evaluations were consistently excellent, and I'd completed all the professional development requirements ahead of schedule. Making major would represent a significant milestone, both personally and professionally. In the military, becoming a field-grade officer means crossing a threshold. You're no longer just responsible for your own performance or that of a small team. You're expected to think strategically, to make decisions that affect larger operations, to represent the Army in ways that extend beyond your immediate unit. It's a recognition of competence, judgment, and leadership capability that takes years to earn. I'd been working toward this goal since my first promotion to sergeant. Every assignment, every additional responsibility, every professional development course had been building toward this moment. When the official notification came through, I felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd experienced in my civilian life. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for 1800 hours on a Tuesday in June. These ceremonies follow a traditional format: formal remarks from senior officers, the administration of oath, the pinning of new rank, followed by a brief reception where family members and colleagues can offer congratulations. It's one of the few military traditions that explicitly includes families, acknowledging that individual achievement affects everyone connected to the service member. I'd attended dozens of these ceremonies for colleagues over the years. The most memorable ones were those where families showed up in force, parents who'd driven hours to be present, spouses who'd taken time off work, children who'd dressed up for the occasion. These ceremonies felt like genuine celebrations, community acknowledgments of hard-earned success. I'd been looking forward to sharing this moment with my family since the promotion became likely. Not because I needed their validation to feel proud of my accomplishment, but because it represented a natural opportunity to bridge the gap between my military life and my civilian relationships. A chance for them to see me in my professional context, to understand what I'd been building over the past decade, to participate in something important to me. The base where the ceremony would take place was about 45 minutes from home by car. I'd considered renting a vehicle for the occasion, but driving myself would mean leaving immediately after the reception to return the rental, missing the informal celebration that usually extended into the evening. Having someone pick me up would let me stay longer, enjoy the moment, maybe introduce my family to colleagues they'd heard about but never met. I sent the message to our family group chat 3 days before the ceremony. Promotion ceremony ends at 1800. Can someone pick me up? The request felt straightforward. I wasn't asking anyone to attend the ceremony itself, though they would have been welcome. I wasn't asking for a major time commitment or complicated logistics. Just a ride home from one of the most important professional moments of my career. Cassie's response came within minutes. We're at a barbecue, call a ride. The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. Not just the refusal, but the tone, as if I'd asked for something unreasonable rather than basic family support. As if my promotion ceremony was an inconvenience that interfered with their social plans rather than something worth prioritizing. Dad's follow-up message made it worse. Should have arranged this earlier. The implication that this was somehow my fault, that I'd failed to provide adequate notice for a ceremony I'd only learned the exact timing of 2 days before, felt like salt in an open wound. As if the problem wasn't their unwillingness to help but my poor planning. I stared at my phone for several minutes, cycling through responses I could send. I could explain the significance of the promotion, remind them that I'd adjusted my schedule countless times for their events, point out that I'd given them more notice than they typically gave me for last-minute requests. I could express hurt, disappointment, or anger in ways that might make them reconsider. Instead, I typed, "No worries." 2 words that covered everything I couldn't say. No worries that 12 years of service apparently wasn't worth a 45-minute drive. No worries that a barbecue with friends took priority over their daughter's career milestone. No worries that I'd spent years being available for their needs while they couldn't be available for mine when it truly mattered. But there were worries, significant ones. The response clarified something I'd been trying not to acknowledge. I had fundamentally misunderstood our relationship dynamic. I'd believed we were family in ways that involved mutual support and shared celebration. They appeared to see me as a resource to be accessed when convenient rather than a person whose achievements deserved recognition. The ceremony itself was beautiful. My commanding officer spoke about leadership, service, and the responsibilities that come with increased rank. When he pinned the gold oak leaves of a major onto my uniform, I felt the weight of everything I'd accomplished and everything I was committing to going forward. Colleagues and their families surrounded me afterward with congratulations, handshakes, and genuine enthusiasm. "You've earned this," my squad leader said. "Well deserved." Their presence made the moment meaningful despite my family's absence. These were people who understood the significance of the promotion because they lived in the same professional world, who recognized the work and dedication it represented because they'd made similar commitments themselves. But riding back to base in a taxi, watching the sun set through the window, I couldn't shake the fundamental sadness of the situation. This should have been a moment of shared joy, a bridge between my professional and personal lives. Instead, it had become another reminder of how little my achievements mattered to the people who were supposed to matter most to me. The taxi driver made small talk about my uniform, thanked me for my service, asked about the ceremony. His genuine interest and respect meant more to me than my family's perfunctory congratulations text messages that arrived later that evening. That night, alone in my quarters, I made a decision that would change everything going forward. I wasn't going to beg for attention or try to convince people to care about my life. I was going to stop treating my family like a priority when they clearly treated me like an option. The next morning, I deleted the family group chat from my phone. The silence felt strange at first, like losing a sense I'd grown accustomed to using without thinking about it. No more constant stream of family updates, logistical coordination, or casual conversation flowing through my phone throughout the day. No more immediate awareness of who needed what, when everyone was gathering, or what minor crisis required attention. I'd expected to feel guilty about deleting the group chat, but instead I felt lighter. The low-level stress of constantly monitoring family dynamics and trying to stay connected to people who clearly didn't prioritize that connection had been more exhausting than I'd realized. Without it, I could focus entirely on my immediate responsibilities and relationships. Work helped fill the space. My new role as major came with significantly increased responsibilities, overseeing supply chain operations for a multi-unit training exercise, coordinating with civilian contractors on equipment procurement, managing a team of 12 junior officers and NCOs. The job required the kind of strategic thinking and leadership skills I'd been developing throughout my career, and I threw myself into it with renewed energy. My phone still buzzed occasionally with individual text messages from family members, usually requests for advice or financial help. Cassie needed someone to co-sign a car loan. Jake wanted input on whether to change his college major. Mom asked for my opinion on refinancing their mortgage. I responded to these requests politely but briefly, providing information without volunteering additional assistance. "Can you call me to talk through the loan terms?" Cassie asked after I'd sent her some basic information about interest rates and down payment requirements. "I'm in training exercises this week," I replied. The information I sent covers the main points to consider. But I have questions about specific details. The loan officer can walk you through anything unclear. This was a significant change from my previous pattern of spending hours on the phone helping family members navigate complex decisions. I still provided information when asked, but I stopped offering my time as freely as I had before. My availability was no longer assumed. The shift wasn't punitive. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone or teach them a lesson. I was simply redirecting my energy toward relationships and activities that felt more reciprocal and rewarding. I started spending more time with colleagues, joining social activities I'd previously skipped to accommodate family obligations, investing in friendships with people who shared similar interests and values. My squad leader noticed the change during a team-building exercise 6 weeks after the promotion ceremony. "You seem more focused lately," she said. "More present." She was right. Without the constant mental bandwidth devoted to managing family relationships and guilt about not being available enough for everyone's needs, I could engage more fully with my immediate environment. I was sleeping better, performing better, and feeling more satisfied with my daily experiences. The first sign that my family had noticed something was different came through Jake. He called directly rather than texting, which was unusual. "Hey, Erica. Haven't heard from you in a while. Things have been busy with the new position. How are classes going?" "Good, good. Listen, I was wondering if you could help me with something. My car needs work, and I don't have the money right now. Could you loan me $1,200 until I get my financial aid check next month?" This was exactly the kind of request I'd handled automatically in the past, wiring money immediately, following up to make sure everything worked out, often not bothering to track whether I'd been repaid. Now I found myself evaluating the request more carefully. What kind of work does it need? Transmission stuff. The mechanic says it's pretty serious. Have you gotten a second opinion? Well, no, but I'd recommend getting quotes from at least 2 shops before committing to expensive repairs. Transmission work can vary significantly in both diagnosis and cost. Right, but I need to fix it soon or I can't get to work. When did you first notice the transmission problems? The conversation revealed that Jake had been ignoring warning signs for months, putting off maintenance and avoiding the problem until it became a crisis. In the past, I would have handled the crisis and then spent time helping him develop better systems to prevent similar situations. Now I focused on immediate information rather than comprehensive problem solving. "I can't loan you money for repairs until you've done proper research on the best solution," I said. "But I can send you some resources about finding reputable mechanics and negotiating repair costs." "But Erica, I need help now." "I understand it's urgent. That's why getting accurate information quickly is important." He was clearly frustrated by my response, though he tried to hide it. We'd both grown accustomed to a dynamic where his problems became my problems to solve. Changing that pattern felt uncomfortable for both of us, but it also felt necessary. Similar conversations followed over the next several weeks. Mom asked for help researching medical insurance options and seemed surprised when I sent her links to comparison websites rather than offering to spend hours on the phone with insurance representatives. Dad needed advice about refinancing their house and was clearly expecting me to research lenders and coordinate applications rather than simply suggesting he talk to his bank. Each interaction required me to actively choose a different response than I would have given 6 months earlier. The muscle memory of being the family problem solver was strong, but I kept reminding myself that my time and energy were finite resources that deserved to be invested thoughtfully. 3 months after deleting the group chat, Cassie called me directly for the first time in over a year. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble. "Are you mad at us?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on changing my own behavior that I hadn't considered how those changes might be interpreted. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not mad. But you've been different lately. Less involved. I've been busy with work." The promotion came with significant new responsibilities. "It's not just that. You don't respond to things the same way." She was right, but I wasn't sure how to explain the shift without creating more conflict. How do you tell someone that you've realized the relationship was one-sided without making them defensive? How do you communicate that you're protecting your own well-being without implying that they've been harmful? "I'm trying to be more intentional about how I spend my time and energy," I said finally. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm focusing on the relationships and activities that feel most meaningful to me right now." There was a long pause. "Does that include us?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications neither of us wanted to address directly. "Of course," I said, "but maybe in different ways than before." The call from Cassie stayed with me for days, not because it was confrontational, but because it wasn't. Her genuine confusion about my changed behavior made me realize how unconscious our family dynamics had become. None of them had noticed the imbalance while it was developing, and now that I was correcting it, they experienced my healthier boundaries as inexplicable withdrawal. I found myself analyzing the situation the way I'd approach a logistics problem at work, mapping the flow of resources, identifying bottlenecks, looking for more efficient distribution systems. The military had trained me to think in terms of mutual support and shared responsibility. Everyone contributes according to their capabilities, Everyone benefits according to their needs, and the mission succeeds because individual efforts combine into something larger than the sum of its parts. My family operated on a different model, one where resources flowed primarily in one direction without much consideration for sustainability or reciprocity. They'd grown comfortable with that arrangement because it worked for them, but it had been slowly draining me in ways I'd only recently begun to acknowledge. The revelation came during a conversation with my company commander about leadership philosophy. The best officers I've known understand that taking care of their people is how you build effective teams, she said. But taking care doesn't mean doing everything for them. It means creating conditions where they can succeed on their own. Her words resonated beyond their immediate military context. I'd been enabling my family's learned helplessness by consistently solving their problems rather than helping them develop their own problem-solving capabilities. My willingness to be the permanent safety net had prevented them from building resilience and self-sufficiency. This realization helped me understand why changing my behavior felt like such a betrayal to them. I wasn't just withdrawing my services, I was forcing them to confront their own capacity for handling challenges independently. That's uncomfortable for anyone, but especially difficult for people who'd grown accustomed to having someone else manage the difficult parts of their lives. Over the following months, I watched this dynamic play out in various ways. Jake's car situation eventually got resolved when he took the time to research mechanics and negotiate repairs himself. The process took longer than it would have with my direct involvement, but he learned skills he could apply to future problems. Mom figured out her insurance questions by calling companies directly rather than having me interpret policy details. Dad handled his refinancing by working with his longtime banker rather than expecting me to coordinate the entire process. Each of these situations could have been resolved more quickly with my intervention, but the slower resolution came with the benefit of increased confidence and confidence for everyone involved. They were developing capabilities they'd let atrophy during the years when my availability made personal growth unnecessary. The family dynamic didn't transform overnight, but it gradually became more balanced. Requests for help became less frequent and more thoughtful. When someone did ask for assistance, they typically came with specific questions rather than expecting comprehensive problem management. The assumption that my time was infinitely available disappeared as they learned to plan ahead and consider alternatives. My social life expanded to fill the space previously occupied by family crisis management. I joined a hiking group that met most weekends, started taking photography classes, reconnected with college friends who'd moved to different cities. These activities introduced me to people who shared my interests and values, who appreciated my company without expecting me to solve their problems. The difference in relationship quality was striking. Conversations with hiking group members focused on shared experiences, mutual interests, and genuine curiosity about each other's lives. No one expected me to be available for last-minute emergencies or assumed my plans were less important than theirs. Friendships developed naturally based on compatibility and mutual respect rather than utility and obligation. 6 months after the promotion ceremony, I received a text from Dad that said simply, "Saw your interview in the base newsletter online. Proud of you." The message surprised me because I hadn't mentioned the interview to anyone in the family. The base public affairs office had featured me in an article about logistics innovations, focusing on a supply chain efficiency project I'd developed. Dad had somehow found the article on his own and taken the time to read it and respond. This felt different from the perfunctory congratulations I'd grown accustomed to receiving. It suggested genuine interest in my professional life, rather than obligatory acknowledgement of achievements I'd announced. The effort required to seek out information about my work indicated a level of attention I hadn't expected. Similar small gestures followed over the next few weeks. Mom forwarded an article about military housing policy with a note asking if it affected me. Jake sent a photo from his campus with a message about how it reminded him of stories I'd told about base life. Cassie called to ask specific questions about my photography hobby rather than making general inquiries about how things are going. These interactions felt more genuine than our previous conversations, partly because they weren't driven by immediate needs or obligations. My family members were reaching out because they wanted to connect rather than because they needed something from me. The shift created space for authentic interest and mutual curiosity that had been absent when our relationships were primarily transactional. I began responding to these overtures with more warmth and detail than I'd been offering to direct requests for help. When someone showed genuine interest in my life, I was happy to share information and engage in real conversation. When someone approached me as a person rather than a resource, I felt motivated to invest time and energy in the relationship. The balance was slowly correcting itself, not through confrontation or explicit negotiation, but through natural consequences and adjusted expectations. My family was learning to approach me differently, and I was learning to distinguish between relationships based on mutual interest and those based on convenience. The process wasn't complete. Years of established patterns don't disappear quickly, but the trajectory felt positive for everyone involved. Spring brought news that would test every boundary I'd carefully constructed over the past year. The Army had selected me for a joint civilian-military disaster response task force, a prestigious assignment that would involve coordinating relief efforts during major emergencies. The role required extensive training in emergency management, interagency cooperation, and public communications. The training component included a week-long exercise simulating response to a Category 5 hurricane, complete with media interviews, community meetings, and coordination with local officials. It was exactly the kind of high-visibility, high-impact work I'd been building toward throughout my career, an opportunity to apply everything I'd learned about logistics and leadership to situations where those skills could save lives. I mentioned the assignment to my family during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, not expecting much reaction, but wanting to share something important about my professional development. The response was predictably brief, a few words of congratulations before the conversation moved to other topics. That lack of engagement no longer surprised or disappointed me. I'd developed realistic expectations about my family's capacity for interest in my military career, and I'd found other sources of support and validation for my professional achievements. The task force training would be challenging and rewarding regardless of whether my civilian relatives understood its significance. The exercise itself exceeded every expectation. Over the course of 5 days, our team managed simulated supply distribution to 50,000 displaced residents, coordinated medical evacuations from flooded areas, and worked with local officials to establish emergency shelters and communication networks. My role involved liaison work between military logistics units and civilian emergency management agencies, translating between different organizational cultures and operational procedures. The complexity of the work was immense, but so was the satisfaction of watching effective systems emerge from coordinated effort. When various agencies learned to complement each other's capabilities rather than competing for resources, the fictional disaster response became remarkably efficient. Real people would survive real emergencies because of the relationships and procedures we were developing during this training. On the final day of the exercise, local news crews interviewed participants about lessons learned and applications to real-world scenarios. I'd done media interviews before, but never on such a visible platform or about work I cared about so deeply. The reporter asked thoughtful questions about military-civilian cooperation, supply chain resilience, and leadership during crisis situations. Major Jefferson has been instrumental in developing protocols that bridge military and civilian emergency response, the exercise director told the camera. Her logistics background and communication skills make her exactly the kind of officer we need for complex interagency operations. The interview aired that evening on the local news, and within hours it had been picked up by the base's social media accounts and shared more widely. Colleagues texted congratulations and comments about the coverage. My commanding officer sent a brief note saying the interview reflected well on our unit and the Army more broadly. I felt proud of the coverage and the recognition, but mostly I felt grateful for work that challenged me intellectually and contributed to something meaningful. This was exactly what I'd hoped for when I joined the military 15 years earlier, the opportunity to develop expertise that mattered, to solve complex problems alongside competent colleagues, to serve a purpose larger than individual advancement. That night, my phone buzzed with an unusual notification. Someone had added me back to the family group chat I deleted almost a year earlier. The message thread contained a flurry of activity. Mom, just saw Erica on the evening news. She looked so professional. Dad, impressive interview. Didn't know she was doing that kind of work. Jake, my sister is famous. Smiling face with sunglasses, Cassie. Wait, what? What interview? Mom, Channel 7 News. They were talking about emergency response training and Erica was one of the main people they interviewed. Cassie, I can't find it online. Can someone send a link? Dad, it was really well done. She explained everything clearly. Jake, I recorded it if anyone wants to see. The conversation continued for several messages, with family members sharing reactions and asking questions about the training exercise and my role in it. The level of engagement was completely different from any response I'd received to previous professional achievements. They seemed genuinely interested and impressed in ways I hadn't seen before. But their enthusiasm felt complicated rather than purely positive. Why had it taken a television interview for them to pay attention to work I'd been doing for years? Why did external recognition seem necessary for them to value my achievements? And why were they adding me back to a group chat I deliberately left after they demonstrated so clearly that my major life events weren't worth their time? I read through their messages without responding, trying to sort through my own reactions. Part of me felt vindicated finally. They were recognizing the significance of my military career. Part of me felt frustrated that it had required media coverage for them to take my work seriously. And part of me felt cautious about engaging with this sudden burst of attention. The next morning brought individual text messages from each family member, all variations on congratulations and requests to catch up about my work. The sudden attention felt overwhelming after months of minimal contact, and I found myself questioning their motives. Cassie's message was the most direct. Can we talk this week? I want to hear about everything you're doing. I had no idea your job was so interesting. The phrase "had no idea" crystallized my ambivalence about their newfound interest. I'd been sharing information about my military career for 15 years, but it had taken television coverage for them to recognize that my work might be worth understanding. Their previous dismissiveness hadn't been about lack of information, it had been about lack of attention. I responded to each message politely, but without committing to lengthy conversations or detailed explanations. Thanks for the congratulations. The training was challenging but rewarding. Simple acknowledgement without opening doors to deeper engagement I wasn't sure I trusted yet. My hesitation wasn't about holding grudges or punishing them for past behavior. It was about protecting myself from falling back into patterns that had proven unsustainable. Their enthusiasm felt genuine, but it also felt conditional on external validation in ways that made me cautious about reinvesting heavily in those relationships. Over the following weeks, I watched carefully as this burst of family attention played out. Mom started forwarding military-related news articles with questions about whether they affected my work. Dad mentioned my television appearance to neighbors and coworkers, something he'd never done with previous achievements. Jake updated his social media to mention having a sister in the Army, adding details about my rank and responsibilities he'd apparently researched independently. The changed behavior felt positive but fragile, like they were trying on a new way of relating to me without fully understanding what had prompted the shift. I appreciated their efforts while remaining realistic about the likelihood that this attention would persist once the novelty wore off. 6 months later, that prediction proved accurate. The increased engagement gradually faded as my family returned to their normal patterns of interaction. They didn't become dismissive again, but the intense curiosity about my military career settled into polite, superficial inquiries that felt similar to our pre-interview dynamic. This time, the decline didn't hurt the way it might have before. I'd learned not to base my sense of worth on their level of interest in my life, and I'd developed other relationships that provided consistent support and genuine engagement. Their approval was nice to have but no longer necessary for my emotional well-being. The most significant change was in my own approach to family relationships. I'd learned to appreciate what they could offer without expecting more than they were capable of giving. When Mom called to chat about everyday topics, I enjoyed our conversation without wishing she'd ask deeper questions about my work. When Dad shared brief updates about his projects, I listened with genuine interest without feeling frustrated that he didn't reciprocate that curiosity about my projects. We'd found a sustainable equilibrium, not the close, mutually supportive family relationship I'd once hoped for, but an honest, realistic connection based on who we actually were rather than who I'd wanted us to be. They got a reliable but boundaried family member who contributed appropriately without overextending herself. I got a low-maintenance relationship with people I cared about without the emotional exhaustion of trying to force deeper connection than they were interested in maintaining. The change wasn't dramatic or revolutionary. It was simply the quiet recognition that some relationships work better with adjusted expectations and careful boundaries. My family remained important to me, but they were no longer the central organizing principle of my emotional life. I'd found my people in other places, and that made all the difference. 3 years after my promotion ceremony, I received orders for a deployment to coordinate disaster relief in the Philippines following a major typhoon. The assignment was a direct result of my task force training and represented the culmination of everything I'd been working toward professionally. I shared the news with my family during our monthly check-in call. Their response was appropriately concerned about my safety and supportive of my career, but without the dramatic emotions or extensive questioning that such news might have generated in families with different dynamics. "How long will you be gone?" Mom asked. 6 months, potentially extending to 8 depending on reconstruction needs. "That sounds like important work," Dad said. "It is. I'm honored to be selected." "We'll miss you," Cassie added. "Stay safe." The conversation was brief and practical, covering logistics and communication plans without dwelling on the significance of the assignment or the emotional impact of separation. It was exactly the kind of interaction I'd learned to expect and appreciate from them, caring but not overwhelming, supportive but not intrusive. After ending the call, I felt a quiet satisfaction about how far all of our relationships had evolved. We'd found a way to maintain connection without the dysfunction that had characterized our earlier interactions. They'd learned to respect my boundaries and autonomy. I'd learned to accept their limitations without resentment. We could be family without anyone sacrificing their well-being for the sake of maintaining impossible expectations. The deployment itself was everything I'd hoped it would be: professionally complex, meaningful work that utilized all of my skills and experience while contributing to genuine humanitarian need. I coordinated supply distribution to remote villages, worked with international aid organizations to maximize efficiency, and helped establish long-term recovery systems that would serve communities for years after military personnel departed. When I returned 8 months later with a commendation for exceptional service and news of my selection for promotion to lieutenant colonel, my family's response was warm but measured. They were proud of my achievements without making them about themselves, supportive of my success without trying to claim credit for it. It was exactly the kind of recognition I could appreciate without reservation, genuine but appropriate, caring but not possessive. Looking back, I realized that the real victory wasn't in teaching my family to prioritize my needs or celebrate my achievements more enthusiastically. It was in learning to build a life so rich and fulfilling that their limitations couldn't diminish my sense of worth or accomplishment. I'd stopped trying to get water from a stone and found an oasis instead. 5 years have passed since that promotion ceremony, and the woman who waited anxiously for her family's acknowledgement feels like someone I used to know. Not because I've become a different person, but because I've become more fully myself, someone whose worth isn't contingent on other people's recognition or approval. My military career has continued to advance in ways that would have seemed impossible during those early years when I was dividing my energy between professional excellence and family crisis management. The deployment to the Philippines led to assignments with international disaster response teams, specialized training in humanitarian logistics, and recognition from both military and civilian agencies for innovations in emergency coordination. Last month, I received notification of my selection for the Army War College, a year-long program that represents the pinnacle of military professional education. Only the most promising field-grade officers are selected, and completion virtually guarantees advancement to senior leadership positions. It's the kind of achievement that validates 15 years of dedicated service and opens doors to the most challenging and rewarding assignments the Army has to offer. When I shared this news with my family, their response was genuinely congratulatory without being effusive. Mom said she was proud. Dad mentioned it to his coworkers. Cassie asked thoughtful questions about what the program would involve and whether I was excited about the opportunity. Jake sent a text with congratulations and a joke about me becoming a general someday. Their reactions felt proportionate and authentic, pleased for my success without making it about themselves, supportive without being overwhelming. We've all learned to interact within our actual emotional capacity rather than the idealized version of family relationships that exists in movies and greeting cards. The most significant change is in how I think about family itself. I used to believe that blood relationships automatically created obligations for mutual support and celebration, that being related meant being each other's priority regardless of compatibility or reciprocity. Now I understand that family, like any other relationship, works best when it's based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection rather than obligation and expectation. My parents, siblings, and I care about each other within the bounds of our actual personalities and capabilities. We're not particularly close by some standards, but we're honest and sustainable in ways that feel healthier than many more intensive family dynamics I've observed. No one sacrifices their well-being to maintain relationships that don't serve them. No one demands more emotional investment than they're prepared to offer in return. This approach has served me well beyond family relationships. I've become much more intentional about friendships, romantic relationships, and professional connections. I invest time and energy in people who reciprocate that investment, who appreciate my company without expecting me to solve their problems, who enhance my life rather than draining it. The hiking group I joined 6 years ago has become my primary social community. We've traveled together to national parks across the country, supported each other through career changes and personal challenges, and developed the kind of deep friendships that are based on shared experiences and mutual respect. These are people who celebrate my achievements because they know how hard I've worked for them, who miss my company when I'm deployed because they genuinely enjoy spending time with me. My romantic life has also benefited from clearer boundaries and higher standards. I'm no longer attracted to people who need me to manage their lives or who offer potential rather than actual compatibility. My current relationship is with a fellow officer who understands military life, respects my career ambitions, and contributes equally to our partnership. We support each other's goals without sacrificing our individual identities or compromising our professional obligations. The difference between these relationships and my family dynamics is stark but not surprising. When people choose to be in your life rather than feeling obligated to maintain connection, the relationship quality tends to be much higher. Mutual selection creates mutual investment in ways that accident of birth cannot. This doesn't mean I love my family less or consider them unimportant. It means I've developed realistic expectations about what they can offer and what I should invest in return. We have pleasant, low-maintenance relationships that don't require anyone to be someone they're not or do more than they're comfortable doing. The Army War College will require me to relocate to Pennsylvania for a year, the first time I've been stationed close to my hometown since my initial deployment. I'm looking forward to the academic challenge and professional development opportunity, but I'm not planning to use the geographic proximity to intensify family relationships. We found a rhythm that works for everyone, and changing it seems unnecessary. My hiking friends are already planning visits to explore Pennsylvania's trail systems. My partner will visit when his schedule allows. My family will probably see me for major holidays, just as they do now. The difference is that I no longer need their presence to feel connected or their absence to feel abandoned. I've built a full, satisfying life that includes them appropriately without depending on them excessively. Sometimes I think about that younger version of myself who measured her worth by how much her family needed her, who confused being useful with being valued. She wasn't wrong to want recognition and appreciation from people she loved. She was just asking for it from people who weren't capable of providing it in the ways she needed. The military taught me that effective teams are built on clear roles, mutual respect, and shared commitment to common goals. When those elements are present, individual contributions are recognized and valued appropriately. When they're absent, even the most dedicated person will eventually burn out trying to compensate for systemic dysfunction. Family relationships aren't military units, but some of the same principles apply. The healthiest connections are those where everyone contributes according to their abilities and receives support according to their needs, where individual achievements are celebrated because they benefit the whole group, where mutual aid flows naturally because everyone is invested in everyone else's success. My family of origin couldn't provide that kind of dynamic, but I've created it elsewhere with people who share my values and approach to relationships. Blood may be thicker than water, but chosen family often proves more nourishing than biological family, especially when the choice is mutual and based on genuine compatibility rather than social expectation. I don't regret the years I spent trying to force deeper connection with my parents and siblings. That experience taught me to recognize the difference between relationships that enhance my life and those that drain it, between people who appreciate me for who I am and those who value me only for what I can do for them. Now, at 38, I have the career I've always wanted, relationships that enrich rather than exhaust me, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing my worth isn't dependent on other people's recognition. The promotion ceremony that my family missed became a turning point not because it taught them to value me more, but because it taught me to stop seeking validation from sources that couldn't provide it. The real victory was learning to build a life so fulfilling that other people's limitations couldn't diminish it. I found my people, pursued my purpose, and created the recognition and appreciation I'd been seeking from others. Sometimes the most important promotion is the one you give yourself, from supporting actor in other people's stories to the protagonist of your own. Sometimes the biggest change comes from the smallest decision, like deciding you won't be everyone's backup plan anymore. Have you ever realized you were giving more than you were getting? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments, hit like if you've ever had to set boundaries with family, and subscribe for more true stories about knowing your worth and protecting your peace.